This is a Dalarna University production.
It's a pleasure to be here, and actually seeing the video a second ago reminds me that I often work in the Middle East, in Gaza and the West Bank, and in South Africa, or Southern Africa. And actually I could quite easily do this presentation there, which might sound paradoxical when you've seen it, but actually what I'm going to talk about is learning and the relationship between new technologies and learning, and maybe the relationships between the technology, the learning, and culture. And so whilst I'd ask you to imagine what this sounds like and looks like in a different culture, I think there are some universal truths. So I will start. Okay, I'm going to talk about well, ostensibly about mobile learning, about what we've been doing for 12 or 13 years, and how it's evolved, and how maybe we made the mistake of thinking learning with mobile technology was the next generation learning, and how, in my view, we probably made a mistake, and we have pursued a particular paradigm, which I'm going to describe, but increasingly I have second thoughts. We may have misunderstood what we were doing and where it was going. But because you're probably not familiar with what we've done in the, if you like, mobile learning research community over the last 15 years, I'm also going to give you a kind of critical overview. Okay, so I think what we've done using mobile technology, maybe 3 or 4 achievements. 2 fairly substantial achievements, and one is clearly that we can use mobile technology to take learning to people or communities or regions where conventional interventions were too difficult, too expensive, too dangerous. So we've used it in, if you like, deeply rural areas in southern Africa or in Kenya. We could equally well use it in Somalia. Apparently the mobile wireless infrastructure is marvellous there, and there is no regulation at all. So it's, if you like, ideally competitive in terms of the cost to deliver mobile learning in the Horn of Africa. And as I say, I think that's one of our achievements, is to take learning across distances, and obviously across distances that have been geographical, where there have been hurdles or barriers which have been distance, geography, infrastructure. And we've done that in a variety of types of community, and often because we're dependent for our sustainability and for our scale on using the learner's own devices, especially in the developing world. What we've used has been the simplest possible technology. It's been messaging of one sort or another. So in lots of parts of the world, and this was a project I was involved in, again, actually with sexual and reproductive health in Cambodia, we've just used messaging, we've just used SMS. And in a sense, I'd kind of ask everyone to go back and think about that. You can do quizzes, you can do interactive stuff, you can do administrative stuff, you can remind students to pick up their library books or collect their assessments or pay their fees. You can provoke them into thinking about what they've just learnt. You can provoke them into thinking about what's coming next. You can use it in formal learning and in informal learning. And I think as a scalable, sustainable technology, it is clearly still one of the most robust. And as I say, it allows us to reach into communities that are otherwise too far away. Or in the case of much of Africa, it's the only alternative. Conventional web-based learning depends on secure rooms, it depends on reliable mains electricity, it depends on infrastructure, hardware licenses, technician support. And so the argument in using mobile technology has always been that people own it already, they understand it, they're familiar with it, they're confident with it. And that isn't necessarily true with computers or TVs. They don't have access or familiarity with other technologies. But to use the phrase that the GSMA use, the Operators Club, it reaches the bottom of the pyramid. And this is an example from South Africa, a project called Dr. Math, which again is very simple. It just uses a messaging technology, Mixit, to connect young kids with undergraduate maths students in order that the young kids can use Mixit messaging to ask for help with their maths. And it's, again, the reason I'm drawing this to everyone's attention is because it's sustainable and scalable. Mixit is a vast, cheap data platform that teenagers in South Africa all use. It's also populated by about 40 or 50 social enterprises, educational initiatives. And it's very, very cheap, but the final part of the equation is that the undergraduates get credit for volunteering. So the mentors, the undergraduates, get credit for helping. The kids pay an incredibly small amount of money for the messaging, and Mixit and the networks get a large revenue because there are millions of kids all spending a couple of cents. And again, it allows us to reach, in this case, kids who may have dropped out of school, living in townships, to get them back into the matriculations. It actually brings their maths up to standard, and it means they're not failing or dropping through the education system further. We've also used mobile technology, not so much because of the separation of geography, but just because it allows us to use small bits of time. I mean, the English would call it dead time, which I think is not a good phrase, really. But you know, in bus stops, at bus stations, elevators. Actually, sorry, the Japanese have discovered that 1 in 10 people drop their mobile phone down the toilet, which is why there is a big market in Japan for waterproof phones. But there is also a learning opportunity as well in those small bits of dead time where we'd otherwise do nothing. Okay, so mobile learning allows us to reach people in these particular occasions where they have, I don't know, 3 minutes, 30 seconds, and to learn something. Now, you can argue that that makes learning trivial. It just reduces it to very small facts. But nevertheless, it might be the only way of reaching them. And there are a lot of small facts that we have to learn. You know, parts of learning to drive. You know, not things we have to think about, but just things we have to remember. Okay, and this is a reference to a project I was involved in. One of the first of the EU-funded projects in 2001, called M-Learning, with actually partners in Sweden, Italy, and the UK. And the interesting thing, I suppose, really, the point I'm making is that, again, this allows us to use a popular, ubiquitous technology, very early mobile devices, to cross a distance, to reach out. But it wasn't geographical, it was social. It was for kids who had dropped out, who might have been homeless. So the distance that we were crossing, the barrier that we were crossing was, if you like, socioeconomic. You know, they could have been kids sleeping in my doorway. They weren't a long way away geometrically, but socially, maybe they were. Yeah, so 3 countries, 5 partners. I think it was about 3.4 million euros. And we developed a variety of technologies, or pedagogies, if you like. So there was a lot of games. So this one is about learning the stopping distance. How much time do you need to stop a car going at a certain speed, or how much distance does it use to stop? So you have the cat, you have the car, you have to do the calculation. And the problem we found was that it was often more fun if the car had an accident, you know, visually exciting, than if you got the right answer. So we learned a lot about games. We also had a user interface that was customizable. So it was, for every device, you got a similar experience, accessing an LMS, a learner management system, and underneath that was an AI system, an artificial intelligence tutoring system. And it was vastly complex, and most of the technology was bespoke. We had to develop it. So, if you like, one of the changes we've seen across the last 10 years is that we started with difficult, expensive, fragile, scarce technology that required expertise and enthusiasm, a transition from that situation to one where basically the technology is shopping. If you wanted to build a system like this now, you'd go to, a retail outlet. You'd go to an app store. You could download most of it. And so we've seen the emphasis change from technology development to pedagogy development. But as I say, my point was that it's allowed us to reach across to different communities, not just because of the geographical distance, but also the social distance. And we've seen work with language teaching continue to evolve. And we've also seen other projects reaching out socially to, in this case, circus communities, Roma and Gypsies. And again, the kids who are Roma kids, Gypsy kids, yes, they are, in England, and probably much of the EU, they are physically separated from the school system because they are moving around. And so the technology allows the connection to be maintained with the school and with the teachers. I think in the UK, maybe they spend 3 months stationary in the winter, and then they move around from site to site in the summer.
Speak to the microphone.
Please do.
I think that's better.
And that's going to be better? Okay. They move around from site to site in the summer for maybe 8 or 9 or 10 months, and they are at a fixed site in the winter. So they can have some schooling in the winter, but in the summer, contact is lost. Technology allows us to keep in touch with them and keep the lessons going, but it also addresses the problem of stigma. Actually, Gypsy kids have trouble with schools because of the social stigma of being a Roma. So it allows us to reach over that barrier as well. There's a point I make later, actually, which is, of course, that whilst I've said that mobile technology allows us to take learning into other communities or to distant people, it actually allows us to take our learning into distant communities. So, I guess there is a problem or a question about this enables Roma and circus and Gypsy kids to, if you like, access national educational opportunities, but does it also mean it's a threat to their cultural identity? And I think, whilst I've argued previously that lots of different marginal and remote communities are safe from e-learning, they're not necessarily safe from learning with mobiles because it's a pervasive and intrusive technology. So I think it's actually quite morally complex when we say we can deliver learning to communities that were remote or distant from learning previously, because it's actually usually our version of learning. And we're seeing a great deal of interest now amongst the aid agencies, UNESCO, USAID, World Bank, World Economic Forum, about using mobiles to deliver Millennium Development Goals and to deliver education, but it is often a globalized, corporatized version of that education. It's not necessarily what the communities themselves would view as their own education, what they teach and learn from each other. It's usually, as I say, globalized content that offers the attractions of scale and sustainability. And clearly the technology scales. If you can make one handset, you can make 1 million of them, but it isn't necessarily the case that the culture and the pedagogy scale up in the same way. But I'll carry on. Okay, we've also seen more attempts to introduce, if you like, more innovative assessment using mobiles. To get the learning out of the classroom and into more meaningful contexts. So, for example, physiotherapy. It allows a camera phone will allow you to capture images of a physiotherapy procedure or a car maintenance procedure. And okay, there are clearly issues of authentication and there are clearly issues of ethics. Is it really the person that it says it is doing what they say they were doing at the time it says it was? And do we worry about the identity and the disclosure of the other person, the patient that's being treated? But we are, as it were, past first base. We've demonstrated there are lots of different ways of doing assessment that are not necessarily still located in the classroom. So we've taken assessment out into the real world, if you like, as well as taking some of the learning out there. And we've also found many, many ways of using mobile technology to increase educational opportunity for people who are physiologically or cognitively different from the mainstream. So people who are visually impaired or have dyslexia and have organisational problems. There are an awful lot of different ways of addressing their barriers to learning that mobile devices can help you reach across. And in this particular case, the man in the picture is visually impaired, and he's using a mobile device, but he's using a dedicated specialist mobile device. What we can now do is, of course, use just ordinary, everyday, popular mobile phone technology, which is obviously cheaper because of mass production. But again, it also removes a stigma. You know, these people who are visually impaired, are not going to necessarily be identified as people with a problem because they're just going to be using the same technology as the rest of us. And I suppose there has been a move from finding specific technological solutions to particular physiological problems to say, can we design for everyone? The idea of inclusive design is now much more popular than looking for a particular technical fix, but it certainly has allowed different communities of people to access education where they wouldn't have done before. So I think what we've achieved over the last 12 or 13 years, that's one of the achievements, that, you know, we've opened up educational opportunity to many different kinds of community. And I think we've also transformed or enhanced the idea of what education could actually be as well. And that's what I'll talk about now. And I think that represents the second major achievement. So there is the opportunity not only to use mobile technology in field work, which is probably obvious, but also to move away from field work that is essentially a dumb script, you know, where you work through what you've been told to work through, collect the data, and then process it in the evening, to the fact that you can have a device with you that will do calculations that maybe will capture data, temperature, pollution, and allow students to formulate a hypothesis and then to test that hypothesis in situ, in real time. You know, to spend the morning taking some preliminary readings and then to think about, okay, so does that mean the nearer to the power station it is hotter, dirtier? Does it depend on the wind direction? And to test those hypotheses there and then. So it's a case of helping them think like scientists. So rather than just repeating experiments that were done 200 years ago, or were just working from a script, actually reacting to the environment. So you could call it contingent learning. It's a response to the immediate situation, not something that was planned. And you can also argue that the use of personal response systems in lectures is something similar, that you can use mobile devices so that we can get responses about our lectures in real time, and we can make adjustments and we can make changes. So again, it's contingent. It's not working through a script, but actually responding to reality that time. Not like any other time, but that time with these people. And obviously we've used mobiles a lot in any of those vocational or professional courses, theatre nurses, for example, where they have a substantial period out of the campus, in the hospital, in the school, in the community, for vets, nurses, doctors, teachers, where the technology allows them to stay in touch with other learners, with their lecturers, to have reference material, to capture images, to capture reflections, to work on their coursework, to take measurements, all of those things that make the learning, I guess, more meaningful, more authentic, and situated in the real environment rather than taking place only in the classroom. And one of the most popular and obvious uses of mobile technology is with context-aware technologies where the computer, where the mobile knows where it is. So these are students of town planning looking at images, information, ideas that relate to exactly where they are on that street. So it may be history, it may be planning law. It can actually feed information, indoors or outdoors, so there's been lots of work like this in art galleries, where the mobile can feed you information about your interests or your preferences as you go from painting to painting to painting, and can make inferences, so it can see that you've been to all of the landscapes or all of the portraits, and then suggest you go and see some more. Or if you stand somewhere for a long time, it'll give you more and more and more information about that particular painting. So it's education, or it's learning that depends on the context, on you, your location, the history. And we also have what we call augmented reality, where essentially we use the phone as a camera viewfinder there, and it knows where it is, and it knows which direction it's pointing. So what is visible in real life is that street scene. What the person holding the phone is seeing is the car as well. It allows you to add extra layers of reality that weren't there, that could be historical, that could be fictional, that could be audio, or could be video, or could be still, or could be moving. And I think the educational possibilities, especially for museums and informal learning, are still limitless. And this is another example, which I think is Dam Square in Amsterdam, where the figures are not in real life. The coloured figures are not there in real life, but everyone is having a shared experience of those figures marching across Dam Square, and it's completely authentic. I mean, I think one of the Berlin Wall. Where you can walk up to the Berlin Wall, you can walk round it. It's not there anymore, but it's completely authentic. It's not a still image. It gets bigger as you get closer. It looks as if it were still there. And essentially what this technology allows us to do is interpose different layers of information between us and real life, what's really there. And as I say, the educational possibilities are limitless. And also, to go back to a previous remark, they are retail. They are not incredibly sophisticated research projects anymore. You can download them. You can download them and you can customize them. So we're seeing a gradual transition from what we've done as a research activity to a popular one. We've also seen the increasing development. If you look historically, there's always been a tension between what people have called learning just in case. You go to school for 10 years just in case when you're 55 you need to know something, to learning just in time, where you learn something on the basis that I need to know it now. And certainly we've seen mobiles exploited for that kind of learning. But the next stage from learning just in time is actually not learning at all. Where the system, the mobile device, can provide you with the information and the guidance so that you don't actually need to have assimilated it. You know, there's no cognitive load. So, for example, it will help doctors in emergency situations by capturing vital signs, pulse, temperature, and actually doing the diagnosis. And again, you can argue this is more efficient, or this is less prone to errors, but you can also argue that it's de-skilling people. People used to have a certain amount of autonomy and skill when they went and, repaired photocopiers. They could choose which way to go. They had to know how a photocopier worked. Well, now their movements can be tracked. They can be taken on the most efficient route. They can be told to look for these errors and signs and problems, and they can be told how to solve them. So we see a de-skilling and a loss of autonomy, as well as increased efficiency and increased effectiveness. Okay, the third achievement is, I think, that we've challenged the ideas about what learning with technology can be. And obviously early ideas 10 years ago, what we thought we were doing was basically e-learning that was portable. And I think we've now seen many changes in understanding what we're doing. So it's not just viewed as the same theoretical base as e-learning, the conversational framework or PASC or whoever, or not just the same theories about human-computer interaction. I think we are still fighting our way through various kind of conceptualizations in terms of seeing what it is, rather than just thinking of it as merely a phone or merely a computer. In many languages it's now difficult to find a meaningful word for mobile phone, partly because, well, what other kind of phone is there? And also, is it only a phone? I think the Germans call it a handy, or maybe that's okay. So, but what I'm pointing to is a kind of difficulty of conceptualizing what it is we've got. But looking back, not at the achievements, but at the problems, in the way I've portrayed it as a research-driven activity funded as part of the kind of innovation rhetoric of central governments in Western Europe, we have not addressed the problem of scale very convincingly. And a lot of the time, all that we've done is prove that spending money on educational research makes education better. Well, we probably knew that. And we haven't actually, maybe, for example, demonstrated that spending money on this kind of educational research makes education more cost-effective. And maybe that's what our managers or our university accountants need to hear, not the kind of clever stuff that we put in peer-reviewed journals. So I think there has been a failing in terms of scale and sustainability, or embedding, if you like, because it's been research, it's been at the margins of the curriculum, it's been at the bits that aren't assessed, that aren't in the examination, because you can't take risks with the examination syllabus. So almost by its nature, we haven't addressed blending or embedding mobile learning into the core curriculum. And I think also, for reasons of, if you like, methodological convenience, the easiest way of doing mobile learning research projects has been to give everyone in the project a mobile phone. So that just proves that if you spend money on mobile phones, people use them for learning. But again, it's not sustainable. We haven't got that money. And the one sustainable way forward for mobile learning is that actually if we use learners' own phones, but we have no experimental evidence really about how to do that, because that isn't how we've done it for the last 12 years. There's a different way of looking at this. There are several different ways of looking at this, I suppose, but actually another is to say that in the Western economies, especially in the 1990s, where we had kind of centre-left governments, there was an enthusiasm for putting as many people as possible through university. In the UK, for putting 50% of the population through university. And but of course a reluctance to actually spend any money. So what the government were looking for was mass production. And you don't have mass production without industrialisation, and the way that we industrialised many of our universities was to fill them with computers. And so maybe the role of mobile learning is just part of that paradigm, that it's now a kind of not mass production of qualified students, but mass customisation of qualified students, or it's part of the flexible manufacturing of qualified students as opposed to the production line manufacturing of qualified students. As I say, there are a variety of different ways of looking at this, so I'd hate to be too kind of optimistic and upbeat. I think we also made a few other mistakes. One was thinking it was just about content. Another was thinking it was about games. Another was to try and put e-learning onto mobile devices, which just proved that, unlike a computer, the screen wasn't very big and the battery was very small. And we are now seeing some work looking at accessing LMSs like Moodle in different ways. So rather than just having mobile Moodle and getting essentially the same experience but on a small screen, there are sometimes ways of actually accessing the material in more appropriate ways. And I think we haven't, sorry, it's a picture I took in Gaza. I don't think we've necessarily recognised that people learn in different ways and that mobiles shape their experience of learning far more than being in university shapes their educational use of mobiles, if you see what I mean. It's now, everyone almost now has a mobile. Using it for education is a very small part of their experience of using a mobile. And when they start learning on a mobile, it's actually their social, their personal, their recreational experiences, their culture, their cultural background that determines how we need to design the learning, not our theories of educational learning, computer-based learning derived from computers. And as I say, I think there has been a risk, especially as mobiles are seen as the delivery mechanism for lots of global agencies, for assuming that we need to be cost effective, and that means delivering the same content wherever we want to deliver it. So this is a photograph taken in East Africa. It's part of the e-book reader scheme supported by World Reader. But and I think Kindles and readers are still, a mobile technology, but it just happens to show a young black girl in Kenya apparently reading Virginia Woolf, who was a rich, not Victorian lady, but nevertheless there are substantial cultural differences between the black girl and the white woman. And World Reader are now beginning to work in local languages like Swahili as well as in English, but nevertheless the momentum of economy, scalability and content often mean that we are sometimes not working in a way that's culturally sensitive enough. And I think we've also worked with the particular paradigm of one-to-one learning, the fact that we all use our individual phone, and in different cultures, and not just in a South African culture, but in our own cultures in the UK, that isn't necessarily the experience of how people use mobiles. They pass them round, they share them. And so I don't think when we're designing learning, we're necessarily recognising that either. So I'll finish there, and maybe take some questions, but yes, this is just a dog barking up the wrong tree. And so the point was really that I think to some extent that's what we've been doing for some of the last 15 years. And what we need to recognise is actually that the use of mobiles is a social phenomenon, not an educational phenomenon, and actually it's a social phenomenon where people, not just people in educational institutions, have the opportunity to generate, share, discuss, transmit, transform ideas, images, information, and they are not necessarily the way that educational institutions would like to package those things, deliver those things, manage those things. And so I think if educational institutions are to stay, if you like, meaningful and authentic to their societies, they have to recognise that the way knowledge and ideas and information move around within our societies is not necessarily the way that the universities and the colleges and the schools are still portraying it. Okay.